70 explicit photos flooded my phone at 3:14 in the morning. It was an arrogant declaration of war from the town saint, who believed her engagement ring and false piety made her untouchable. She mistook my silence for weakness, forgetting that I am a crisis management expert who knows how to weaponize a scandal. She wanted to be the star of my life, so I decided to help her become the most famous woman in town. My name is Serena Cross. I am 34 years old, and as the director of strategy at Ether Systems, I am paid a significant salary to predict disasters before they happen. Yet, I did not predict the vibration on my nightstand at 14 minutes past 3 in the morning. The buzzing was persistent, like an angry hornet trapped against the glass of a window. I reached for the phone, the blue light searing my retinas in the pitch black of the master bedroom. It was an unknown number. The text preview did not ask who I was. It told me who I was not. The message read, "He says my body is his true home. You are just an empty shell." I swiped the notification open. My phone hesitated for a fraction of a second, struggling to process the sheer volume of incoming data. Then, they cascaded down the screen. 70 photographs. They were not vague or grainy. They were high definition, unflinching, and pornographic. There was my husband, Derek, tangled in sheets and sweat, his face contorted in pleasure, his hands gripping skin that was definitely not mine. My brain processed the images with the detached efficiency of a scanner. I did not need to guess who the girl was. The strawberry blonde hair, the delicate cross necklace resting between her breasts, the wide and innocent eyes that were currently rolled back in ecstasy. It was Lila, the town saint, the 24-year-old daughter of our church's most respected deacon. The woman who was currently engaged to Nathan, a man whose kindness was only matched by his substantial bank account. Beside me, Derek let out a snore. He had come home 2 hours ago, complaining of exhaustion from a grueling business trip, claiming he needed sleep more than he needed food or water. A normal wife might have screamed. She might have shaken him awake, thrown the phone at his head, and demanded an explanation. But I felt a strange, icy calm settle over my chest. It was as if my heart had slowed down, regulating itself to a predatory rhythm. The hysteria never came. Instead, the strategist in me woke up. I sat up against the headboard, the silence of the room heavy and suffocating. I did not look at the photos to hurt myself. I looked at them to build a case. I zoomed in, my fingers pinching and spreading on the screen. I noted the thread count of the sheets. I identified the logo on the bathrobe in the background, which belonged to the Ritz-Carlton. I checked the metadata. These were not old memories. The most recent one was taken 4 hours ago. Then I saw it. In photo number 12, Derek's hand was pressed against the headboard. On his wrist sat a submariner with a blue dial. My breath hitched, but not from grief. That was the Rolex I had purchased for our anniversary next month. It was the watch bought with the money he claimed he had accidentally lost from our joint investment fund due to a bad stock tip. He had not lost the money. He had stolen it to buy himself a gift, and he was wearing it while sleeping with another woman. I moved quietly out of bed, taking the phone with me to my home office down the hall. I connected the device to my secure server. Within 10 minutes, every single image was backed up to 3 separate encrypted cloud accounts and a physical hard drive locked in my safe. I renamed the folder Project Annihilation. I walked back into the bedroom and stood over Derek. He looked soft in his sleep, his mouth slightly open. For 8 years, I had looked at that face and felt warmth, safety, and partnership. Now, I looked at him and felt absolutely nothing. It was like looking at a broken printer or a cracked vase, something that had lost its utility and was now just taking up space. The switch had been flipped. The love was not just dead, it had been erased. I turned on my heel and went downstairs to the kitchen. The marble countertops were cold under my fingertips. I brewed a pot of black coffee, the dark liquid swirling into the carafe. I did not shed a tear. I pulled a notepad from the drawer and sat at the island. Crying was for victims. I was not a victim. I was a woman with a strategy, and the sun had not even risen yet. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound accompanying my thoughts as I sat there. 8 years of marriage lay on the dissection table of my mind, and I began to cut. Derek was a talented architect, or at least, that was the narrative I had carefully crafted for him. In reality, he was a man of fragile ego and mediocre vision who constantly complained about being stifled by the corporate world. I was the one who used my connections at Ether Systems to secure his biggest contracts. I was the one who proofread his proposals and smoothed over his temper tantrums. I had treated him like a blue-chip stock that just needed time to mature, but it turned out he was a bad investment from the start. Then there was Lila. At 24 years old, she was a decade younger than me and possessed the kind of weaponized innocence that only dangerous women know how to wield. She was a preschool teacher who posted daily scripture verses on social media and spoke softly about family values and the sanctity of marriage. To the town, she was a ray of sunshine in a floral dress. To her father, the revered church deacon, she was the embodiment of virtue. She wore her purity like a shield, daring anyone to question the darkness underneath. She was currently engaged to Nathan, a man so good it made my teeth ache. Nathan was wealthy, kind, and devout. He looked at Lila and saw a future mother for his children, a partner in faith. He trusted her with the blind, unwavering confidence of a golden retriever. It was almost tragic how easy she must have found it to manipulate him. I remembered the last time Lila came to our house for dinner. She had sat across from me, her hand resting possessively on Nathan's arm, while her eyes tracked Derek's movements around the room. She had called me big sister that night. She had gushed over the roast I cooked and told me I was so lucky to have a model man like Derek. I recalled the subtext now, the secret smiles they exchanged when I went to the kitchen to fetch dessert, the way her foot had likely been rubbing against his calf under the mahogany table. I had dismissed it then as the harmless admiration of a young girl. I had been a fool. The signs had been there for 6 months. Derek had suddenly started caring about his appearance, buying expensive lotions and trimming his beard with obsessive precision. He had started taking weekend trips to supervise construction sites 3 towns over. He claimed he was dedicated to his craft. In truth, he was dedicated to the 24-year-old who was likely waiting for him in a hotel room paid for with my money. The audacity of her text message was breathtaking. By sending me those photos, Lila was forcing my hand. She wanted me to file for divorce. She wanted to be the reason Derek left me, cementing her power over him. However, she had not broken off her engagement with Nathan. That was the detail that gave her away. She wanted Derek for the excitement, but she wanted Nathan for the security. She intended to marry Nathan for his bank account and social standing while keeping Derek as her side obsession. She wanted to have her cake and eat it too, all while maintaining her spot in the church choir. She was betting on my silence. She assumed that a woman in my position, a high-ranking executive, would be too ashamed to admit her husband was sleeping with a girl young enough to be his niece. She thought I would sweep this under the rug, divorce Derek, quietly citing irreconcilable differences, and let her walk away with her reputation intact. She thought I would protect her to protect myself. She did not understand who she was dealing with. Lila's power came from her perception. Her father's standing in the church was her armor. Nathan's love was her ticket to the upper class. If I stripped those away, she was nothing more than a preschool teacher with a ruined reputation in a conservative town. My objective shifted in the growing light of dawn. I did not just want to leave Derek. I wanted to expose the rot beneath the velvet curtain of her life. She wanted to be famous in my private world, so I decided I would make her famous in the entire town. I arrived at the headquarters of Ether Systems at 6:30 in the morning. The office was a fortress of glass and steel, silent and sterile, which was exactly the environment I needed. I logged into my secure terminal, the screens glowing with the familiar comfort of spreadsheets and data streams. Derek always assumed I was too busy managing corporate strategy to micromanage our domestic finances. He relied on my trust like a crutch, believing that my high income made me blind to the details. Today, I kicked that crutch away and began the autopsy of our life together. I pulled up our joint retirement fund and the diversified investment portfolio. The numbers told a story of systematic theft. I saw withdrawals of $4,000, then $2,500, all categorized under vague labels like miscellaneous expenses or home repairs. I cross-referenced these dates with the metadata from the explicit photos I had analyzed a few hours prior. The timestamps matched perfectly. While Derek was supposedly attending a sustainability conference in Chicago, he was actually spending 3 nights at a 5-star resort in Aspen. The room service bill alone was $600, a sum he had charged to our joint debit card while likely lying in bed with her. I moved on to the credit card statements, specifically the supplementary platinum card issued under my private consultancy firm, which I had authorized him to use strictly for emergencies. My hands actually stopped moving when I saw the charge. It was a transaction for $12,000 at a bridal boutique in the city. I clicked on the digital receipt details. It was for a custom designer wedding gown and a diamond tennis bracelet. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Derek had bought his mistress the dress she intended to wear to marry another man, and he had used my hard-earned equity to do it. He was financing the costume for her charade. The audacity escalated as I dug deeper. I found a wire transfer of $5,000 to the luxury venue hosting Lila's engagement party. The payment was flagged in the notes as a sponsorship from an anonymous donor. He was literally paying for the celebration of his own cuckolding, subsidizing the very event where Lila would pledge her eternal troth to Nathan, all to keep her happy and compliant. I picked up the secure line and dialed Evelyn. Evelyn was not the type of lawyer who offered tissues or condolences. She was a shark who offered scorched earth tactics. I explained the financial discrepancies in under 2 minutes. Her voice on the other end was sharp and professional. She advised me to maintain absolute silence. She told me I could not scream, I could not confront him, and I certainly could not let him know I knew. She said we needed 48 hours to legally freeze the assets and file for a forensic accounting audit before I served him. She emphasized that silence was my most dangerous weapon until the trap was fully set. Before hanging up, I found one last sickening detail that sealed Lila's fate. There were recurring payments of $500 sent to the local church's charity fund. However, the tax-deductible receipts were forwarded directly to Lila's email address. She was taking my husband's stolen money, donating it to the church, and taking the credit for herself to bolster her image as a charitable angel. She was buying her sainthood with my earnings. I compiled every bank statement, every transaction ID, and every receipt. This was no longer just a domestic dispute about infidelity. This was grand larceny and embezzlement. I printed 2 distinct dossiers. The first was a thick, bound document intended for the Superior Court judge. The second was a digital presentation, formatted for maximum visual impact, intended for a very different audience. I placed the files in my briefcase and snapped the locks shut. The audit was complete, and the bill was due. Derek walked through the door just after 6 o'clock in the evening, carrying a bouquet of stargazer lilies wrapped in brown paper. The heavy, sweet scent hit me immediately, filling the entryway. Lilies were not my favorite flower. In fact, I had told him years ago that they reminded me of funerals. They were Lila's favorite. He had likely bought 2 bouquets, given the fresh one to her, and brought the wilting leftovers home to me. He leaned in to kiss my cheek, launching into a rehearsed monologue about how exhausting the traffic had been coming back from the construction site, his voice thick with a fatigue that I knew was actually post-coital exhaustion. I did not recoil. I did not scream that I had seen the timestamps on the photos which proved he had been in a hotel bed until noon. I employed the gray rock method. I became an uninteresting, impenetrable surface. I continued chopping vegetables for the salad and simply said that it sounded tiring. I offered no follow-up questions. I gave him no emotional fuel to feed on. Derek lingered in the kitchen doorway, sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure. My lack of concern unsettled him. Usually, I would have been fussing over him, heating up his dinner, and asking about his day. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his eyes scanning my face for a crack, but he eventually decided to interpret my coldness as workplace stress. He patted my shoulder awkwardly and went upstairs to shower off the scent of his mistress. My phone buzzed on the counter. It was her again. Lila could not stand the silence any more than Derek could. The message read, "Do you like the lingerie I am wearing in photo 42? Derek picked it out specifically for me because he said red looks cheap on you." I felt a sharp flash of anger, but I suffocated it instantly. I did not block the number. I did not reply to give her the satisfaction of a fight. I took a screenshot of the message and moved it into the encrypted folder labeled harassment evidence. Every taunt she sent was just another nail she was voluntarily hammering into her own coffin. Dinner was a study in suffocation. The only sound was the scraping of silverware against porcelain. Derek pushed his food around the plate, clearing his throat several times before finally bringing up what was truly on his mind. He started complaining about the restrictions of his current budget, and then mentioned that he had stumbled upon a once-in-a-lifetime investment opportunity. He told me he needed a capital injection of roughly $100,000 from my personal accounts to get a new project off the ground. I knew exactly what that project was. It was a down payment on a townhouse near the river, a place where he could stash Lila once I inevitably kicked him out. I wiped my mouth with a napkin and looked him dead in the eye. I forced the corners of my mouth up into a terrifyingly polite smile. I told him that I would be happy to consider it, provided he could supply me with a comprehensive business plan, a risk assessment analysis, and a full breakdown of the projected returns by Monday morning. Derek choked on his water. He had expected me to just sign a check like I usually did. He stammered that it was too early for paperwork, but I just stared at him until he looked away, the silence stretching out until it was unbearable. For the rest of the meal, he kept his phone in his lap under the table. I watched the reflection of the screen in his glasses. His face lit up with a sick, infatuated glow every time he typed a reply. He was telling her that the money was coming. He was promising her a future that did not exist. I stood up to clear the table and saw the mail pile. On top sat a heavy cream-colored envelope with calligraphy on the front. It was the formal invitation to the engagement party of Lila and Nathan, taking place this coming Saturday. It was the perfect stage. I turned to Derek and tapped the envelope against my palm. I told him that we would certainly be attending. I added that I would meet him there as I might be a little late. I told him I had a very special surprise gift that I needed to prepare for the happy couple. He smiled, relieved that I was playing the part of the supportive wife. He had no idea that the gift was his destruction. I arranged a private audience with Pastor Thomas at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning. He was not just the head of the church council. He was Lila's godfather and the man who had baptized her, confirmed her, and was now scheduled to officiate her wedding. His office smelled of lemon polish and old theology books, a sanctuary of silence that felt heavy with judgment. I dressed for the part of the grieving, confused wife. I wore a modest navy dress with a high neckline, and I applied makeup specifically designed to make me look pale and sleep-deprived, yet dignified. I wanted him to see a woman holding herself together by a thread. Pastor Thomas welcomed me with a warm, condescending smile, gesturing for me to sit in one of the leather armchairs opposite his massive mahogany desk. He assumed I was there to discuss a donation or perhaps marital counseling, given the rumors of Derek's wandering eye that I knew circulated in the congregation. I did not start with the accusations. Instead, I began with a theological inquiry. I asked him about the nature of deception and whether a person who wears a mask of righteousness is more dangerous than an open sinner. He nodded gravely, quoting scripture about wolves in sheep's clothing, completely unaware that the wolf he was condemning was his favorite lamb. He took the opportunity to pivot the conversation to Lila. He leaned back in his chair, clasping his hands over his stomach, and gushed about her. He told me that Lila was a shining example of what a modern Christian woman should be. He spoke of her purity, her dedication to the children's ministry, and how she would soon become a pillar of the Women's Guild once she married Nathan. He called her a jewel of the parish. It was almost impressive how effectively she had blinded him. I listened to his praise without interrupting, letting him paint a portrait of a saint. When he finished, I reached into my purse and withdrew a single, heavy cream-colored envelope. I did not slam it down. I placed it on the desk with the gentle reverence of an offering. I told him that I had come across some disturbing materials that were shaking my faith, and I needed his spiritual guidance to understand what I was looking at. He opened the envelope with a furrowed brow. I had curated the contents specifically for him. There were no explicit bedroom photos here. Instead, I had printed screenshots of Lila's text messages to Derek where she mocked the church. One message read, "I cannot wait until Sunday service is over because listening to Thomas drone on for an hour is torture, but at least it keeps my dad and Nathan happy." Another message bragged about how easy it was to manipulate the church elders into giving her charity funds. The final item in the stack was a photograph taken 3 weeks ago. It showed Derek's car parked in the church lot late at night, directly under the illuminated cross of the steeple. Through the windshield, Lila and Derek were clearly visible, engaged in a sexual act in the front seat. The license plate was legible. The holy setting was undeniable. I watched the blood drain from Pastor Thomas's face. It started at his chin and vanished all the way up to his receding hairline. His hands began to tremble so violently that he dropped his reading glasses onto the desk with a loud clatter. He stared at the image of his goddaughter desecrating the church grounds, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The image of the saint had not just been cracked, it had been pulverized. I stood up slowly, smoothing the skirt of my dress. I kept my voice low and respectful. I told him that I had no desire to cause a public spectacle or damage the reputation of the church. I simply stated that I could not, in good conscience, allow a man of God to bless a union that was built on such profound mockery and deceit. I told him that the truth was now his burden to bear. I turned and walked out of the office, leaving the door slightly ajar. Behind me, the silence was deafening, filled only by the heavy, suffocating weight of a man whose entire worldview had just collapsed on his desk. I arranged to meet Nathan at a private, dimly lit coffee house on the edge of town at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a members-only establishment where business deals were negotiated in hushed tones, far removed from the prying eyes of the church congregation or the gossip circles of the country club. Nathan arrived 5 minutes early. He looked like the picture of a joyous groom. He was beaming, his tie perfectly knotted, radiating an energy of hopefulness that was physically painful for me to witness. He sat down and immediately ordered us tea, his manners impeccable. Before I could even steer the conversation, he launched into a monologue about the wedding preparations. He spoke about the floral arrangements and how Lila wanted white roses to symbolize the purity of their union. He told me how lucky he felt to have found a woman who shared his traditional values and who had saved herself for marriage in a world that had lost its moral compass. He used the word pure 3 times in the first 10 minutes. He truly believed he was living in a fairy tale. I looked at him and felt a heavy, suffocating weight in my chest. It was pity, sharp and deep. He was a good man, decent and generous to a fault, but his goodness had rendered him blind. He was a lamb walking willingly toward the slaughterhouse, led by a butcher wearing a designer dress. I knew that what I was about to do would destroy his world. I was about to break his heart, but I knew that letting him marry her would be a far greater cruelty. A broken heart heals, but a life built on a lie is a prison sentence. I reached into my leather tote bag and pulled out my tablet. I did not offer a preamble. I did not tell him to brace himself. I simply unlocked the screen and slid it across the polished wood of the table toward him. I had prepared a specific folder for this meeting. It did not contain the most graphic images of the lovers' faces. Instead, it focused on the hands. The first image on the screen was high resolution. It showed a woman's hand gripping a bedsheet, the knuckles white with tension in a moment of climax. On the ring finger sat a distinctive, massive 3-carat oval diamond set in platinum. It was the custom engagement ring Nathan had designed himself. I knew because he had proudly shown me the sketches months ago. In the background of the shot, the hairy forearm of my husband was clearly visible, his watch tan line unmistakable. Nathan stared at the screen. He blinked, once, twice. His brain was desperately trying to reject what his eyes were seeing. He tried to speak, to ask what this was, but the words died in his throat. I did not let him look away. I swiped to the next image. This was not a photo, but a screenshot of a text message conversation between Lila and Derek from just 2 days ago. The message read, "Nathan is so boring that I have to drink 2 glasses of wine just to listen to him talk about his day. He is just the gold mine that will pay for our fun later." The color drained from Nathan's face so fast that I thought he might faint right there in the booth. The illusion of the chaste, loving fiancé evaporated instantly, replaced by the brutal reality of a cold, calculating predator who viewed him as nothing more than an ATM. He did not scream. He did not flip the table. He just slumped forward, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders began to shake violently. He was weeping in total silence, a man grieving the death of a future that never really existed. I reached across the table and placed my hand firmly over his. My skin felt ice cold against his feverish heat. I told him that he deserved the truth. I told him that he was a good man and that I would not let them make a fool of him at his own wedding. He looked up at me, his eyes red and raw, filled with a mixture of humiliation and rage. He asked me what he should do. He said he wanted to go to her house and confront her immediately. He wanted to call off the engagement right now. I squeezed his hand. I told him no. I explained that if he canceled now, quietly, she would spin a lie. She would tell the town that he got cold feet, or worse, that he was abusive. She would play the victim, and with her father's influence, the town would believe her. I told him the only way to be truly free was to let the truth be seen by everyone. I told him to attend the party tonight. I told him to stand by the microphone and wait for my signal. By the time we left the cafe, his tears had dried, replaced by the cold, hard resolve of a man who had nothing left to lose. We were no longer just 2 victims. We were partners in a demolition crew, and the dynamite was already set. I drove straight home after leaving Nathan, arriving at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was the first time in 5 years that I had cut my workday short. The house was silent when I walked in, a stillness that felt less like peace and more like the breathless moment before a detonator is pressed. I did not sit down to rest. I moved with the efficiency of a soldier breaking down camp in enemy territory. I pulled 2 large suitcases from the back of the closet and began to pack. I did not pack everything, only what mattered. I took my birth certificate, the deed to the house which was solely in my name, my jewelry, and the hard drives containing the evidence. I cleared out the safe. I stripped the shelves of anything that held sentimental value to me, leaving behind only the things that Derek had bought or the things we had purchased together, which now looked like garbage to my eyes. When the suitcases were zipped and staged by the front door, I walked into the kitchen. I placed a thick manila envelope on the center of the granite island. Inside lay the divorce papers, already signed and notarized by Evelyn earlier that day. On top of the envelope, I placed my wedding band and the engagement ring. The diamonds sparkled in the afternoon sun, cold and hard. They were no longer symbols of commitment. They were merely expensive rocks that I was discarding along with the man who gave them to me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Derek. He claimed that an urgent client meeting had come up and he would be running late for the engagement party, but he promised to meet me there by 7:30. I did not reply. Instead, I opened the tracking application on my phone. The blue dot representing his location was not at any office building. It was stationary at the luxury apartment complex on the east side of town, exactly where Lila lived. He was not working. He was getting a final fix of his mistress before standing up to support her engagement to another man. I dialed the private number for the head of security at Ether Systems. I authorized the immediate asset recovery protocol for the company vehicle Derek was driving and the high-end laptop he used for his freelance work, both of which were technically property of my firm. By the time he walked out of the party tonight, his digital keys would be revoked, his passwords would be scrubbed, and his car would be nothing more than a 2-ton paperweight that he could not start. Next, I opened my laptop one last time. I composed an email to the editor of the local town gazette. I used a secured, encrypted server to route the message so it could not be traced back to me. The subject line was simple corruption in the diocese. The body of the email promised a story that would shatter the moral backbone of the community, advising them to have a reporter present at the church hall by 8 o'clock. I hit send and closed the lid. I went upstairs to dress for the execution. Derek had always insisted I wear neutral colors, beiges and creams that helped me blend into the background so I would not outshine him. Today, I reached into the back of my closet and pulled out a dress I had bought in Milan years ago and never worn. It was a structured, blood-red silk gown that fit like a second skin. It was the color of power, of passion, and of warning. I applied my lipstick, a matching shade of crimson, and looked at myself in the mirror. The tired wife was gone. A warrior stared back. My phone chimed with a sequence of messages. The first was from Pastor Thomas. It read, "The truth will be illuminated." The second was from Nathan. It was short and grim. He wrote, "I am ready." The third message was from Lila. She could not resist one final jab. She wrote, "Make sure you come tonight. Serena, I want you to see what real happiness looks like." I stared at her words and felt a smile curl the corner of my painted lips. I whispered to my reflection in the glass, "Do not worry, Lila. I am bringing the brightest light show this town has ever seen." The engagement party was a masterclass in deception held within the sanctified walls of the great hall of the church. It was a sea of blinding white. White hydrangeas, white linen tablecloths, and white silk drapes hung from the high ceiling to symbolize a purity that had vacated the premises long ago. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the self-congratulatory murmurs of the local elite, all gathered to celebrate a union that was rotting from the inside out. Lila was the undisputed centerpiece of this farce. She moved through the crowd in a modest, high-necked cream cocktail dress, constantly clutching her left hand to her chest to ensure the massive diamond caught the light at every single angle. She played the role of the blushing bride to perfection, lowering her lashes and giggling softly whenever someone complimented her on her virtue or her devotion to traditional values. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award, and the audience was eating it up. In the shadows of the periphery stood my husband. Derek was nursing a scotch, leaning against a stone pillar with a look on his face that he probably thought was subtle. It was not. He watched Lila with a possessive, hungry glint in his eyes, like a wolf waiting for the shepherd to turn his back. He believed he was the smartest man in the room, the secret king enjoying his conquest from afar, completely unaware that the guillotine blade was already hovering above his neck. Then I walked in. The heavy oak doors swung open, and the hum of conversation died down instantly. Against the backdrop of pale pastels and stark white, my blood-red silk gown was a violent slash of color. It was not a dress for a guest. It was a dress for a conqueror. I walked into the room with my head held high, the silk swishing around my legs with a sound like a blade being drawn from a sheath. The crowd parted for me, their eyes wide, sensing that the atmospheric pressure of the room had just shifted on its axis. I offered tight, unreadable smiles to the people who had whispered about me behind my back for years. Lila saw me and excused herself from a group of elderly choir members. She glided over to me, her smile tight and triumphant. She leaned in close, invading my personal space, and dropped her voice to a venomous whisper that only I could hear. She said thank you for coming to witness her victory. She told me that she hoped I was taking notes. She thought the game was over. She thought she was standing on the winner's podium. I did not whisper back. I raised my voice, projecting it clearly so that the surrounding guests stopped their conversations to listen. I told her that I would not have missed the most important moment of her life for anything in the world. I added that I had brought a very special gift just for her, one that she would never forget. Lila blinked, confused by my lack of defeat, but before she could respond, the sharp feedback of a microphone whined through the speakers. Nathan was standing on the raised stage at the front of the hall. He did not look like a man in love. He looked like a statue carved from cold, unforgiving marble. His face was devoid of emotion, his eyes flat and hard. Beside him stood Pastor Thomas. The pastor did not look benevolent tonight. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his expression grave and stern, looking less like a clergyman about to give a blessing and more like a federal judge about to read a death sentence. The atmosphere in the room curdled instantly. The laughter died out. The clinking of silverware against china stopped. An uneasy, suffocating silence settled over the 200 guests as they sensed that something was wrong. Nathan cleared his throat. His voice was steady, lacking any tremor of nerves. He asked everyone to please turn their attention to the large projection screen behind him, where they would normally view a montage of their relationship memories. I stood near the back, isolated in my circle of red. I lifted a crystal flute of champagne to my lips and took a slow, deliberate sip. The liquid was cool and crisp against my tongue. I watched Lila's face turn toward the screen, her smile faltering just a fraction as the lights in the hall dimmed. The fuse was lit, and I was the only one in the room who knew exactly how big the explosion was going to be. The projector beam cut through the darkness of the church hall, illuminating the massive screen behind the stage. The guests, holding their breath for a romantic montage of the happy couple set to a sentimental ballad, were instead greeted by a 10-foot-tall projection of a text message. The sender was clearly identified as Lila. The timestamp was from just 48 hours ago. The message read, "I am his next wife." The sound that ripped through the room was not a scream, but a collective, horrified intake of breath. It was the sound of 200 illusions shattering simultaneously. Lila froze in the middle of the floor. The smug, victorious smile she had worn all evening did not just fade. It evaporated, leaving behind a mask of pure terror. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a semi-truck that was not slowing down. The presentation did not pause for her to recover. I had edited the slideshow with the ruthlessness of a prosecutor. The image shifted. Now, the screen displayed high-definition photographs of Lila and Derek entering the elevator of the Ritz-Carlton. Then came the financial records. A split screen showed a bank statement from Nathan's personal account next to a receipt for a luxury watch, with a bright red arrow pointing to the transaction. The caption I had added was simple and brutal. It read, "The groom bought the gift for the mistress to give to the husband." Then came the finale. The photo of Derek's car in the church parking lot appeared, the illuminated cross clearly visible above the vehicle, with the two of them intertwined in the front seat. The gasps turned into a roar of scandalized murmurs. Lila's mother let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal and collapsed into the arms of a deacon, while her father stood frozen, his face a mask of purple rage and humiliation as the elders of the church turned their backs on him. Nathan gripped the microphone stand, his knuckles white. His voice boomed through the speakers, drowning out the rising chaos. He turned to look at the woman he was supposed to marry. He told her that if she wanted to be the next wife of a cheat, she was welcome to the position. He announced that he was formally returning her to her rightful owner. Pastor Thomas stepped forward next. He did not look at his goddaughter with pity. He looked at her with the wrath of the Old Testament. He spoke into the microphone, his voice shaking with suppressed fury. He declared that the church was a house of truth and that it would not harbor those who made a mockery of its sanctity. He stripped Lila and her family of their standing within the parish effective immediately. The social execution was swift and total. Derek snapped. He realized that his life was disintegrating on a projection screen. He roared and charged toward the stage, his eyes wild, intending to rip the cables out of the machine. He never made it. 2 burly security guards, whom Nathan had hired specifically for this moment, intercepted him halfway up the stairs. They did not go easy on him. They tackled him to the ground with a bone-crunching thud, pinning his arms behind his back while he thrashed and cursed. Lila saw her safety net vanish. She threw herself at Nathan, grabbing the lapels of his suit. She screamed that it was not her fault. She shrieked that Derek had seduced her, that she was a victim, that she still loved Nathan. Nathan looked down at her hands touching his suit with an expression of utter revulsion. He peeled her fingers off his jacket one by one and shoved her away, causing her to stumble back in her high heels. The room fell silent as I stepped out of the shadows. My red dress blazed under the house lights. I walked calmly toward the stage where my husband lay pinned on the carpet, his face pressed against the floor. I stood over him, looking down like a queen inspecting a peasant. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the thick envelope containing the divorce petition. I let it drop. It fluttered down and landed squarely on the back of his head. I spoke clearly, my voice carrying to the back of the stunned room. I asked him if he enjoyed drama. I told him that this was the final act I had written just for him. The sirens cut through the night air just as the security guards hauled Derek to his feet. I had timed the call perfectly. The officers did not care about his infidelity, but they cared very much about the corporate embezzlement and wire fraud I had documented in the files I handed over to the detective waiting in the vestibule. They cuffed him in front of the entire congregation. He screamed that it was a misunderstanding, but the cold steel around his wrists said otherwise. Lila stood alone in the center of the room, a pariah in a cream dress. Nathan did not yell at her. He simply walked up, extended his hand, and demanded the ring back. He also asked for the keys to the luxury sedan he had leased for her. She was stripped of her status, her transport, and her future in the span of 5 minutes. The church elders wasted no time. They issued an immediate verbal decree that Lila and her family were no longer welcome in the fellowship, effectively exiling them from the only social circle that mattered in this small town. I walked out of the church doors and inhaled the cool night air. It tasted different than it had that morning. It tasted like oxygen, sharp and clean. For 8 years, I had been carrying a dead weight, dragging a man who resented my success while living off my labor. Now, I was light. Nathan met me at the bottom of the stone steps. We did not hug. We did not exchange pleasantries. We simply nodded at one another. 2 soldiers who had survived the war and completed the mission. The legal proceedings were brutally efficient. Without access to our joint accounts or my company's assets, Derek could not afford a defense attorney. He was forced to use a public defender who looked at my mountain of evidence and advised him to fold. The divorce was finalized in 1 week. I was awarded the house, the full investment portfolio, and significant damages for emotional distress. Derek walked away with his clothes in a garbage bag and a pending criminal trial. The universe, however, had one final twist of the knife. It turned out Lila was pregnant. She had gotten exactly what she wanted. She had trapped him. But instead of trapping a wealthy architect, she had shackled herself to an unemployed felon with a criminal record and 0 assets. They were now stuck together in a cramped rental apartment, bound by a child and mutual resentment, living in the poverty they both feared more than anything else. I did not stay to watch them rot. I sold the house within the month. I took the equity and launched my own crisis management consultancy, finally becoming the CEO of my own life. Then, I booked a 1-way ticket to Europe. I am writing this from a small table outside a cafe in Paris. The coffee here is strong, and the morning sun is warm on my face. My phone buzzed a moment ago. It was a message from Derek, filtered directly into my spam folder. It was a long, rambling plea for forgiveness, begging for a loan to help with the legal fees. I did not read past the first line. I pressed delete. Then I turned the phone off completely. The croissant is delicious. and for the first time in my life, the silence is not empty. It is full of peace. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please comment down below where you are listening from right now. I would love to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like the video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.